Greetings. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet wrapped in a pandemic, which the three that have emerged in recent days with promising data holds the promise that we can get some control on this. There's still parts of the world, particularly my part of the world, where there's no sense that we have control of this virus. And it's largely often due to the information environment, the communication environment that we connect with, especially during a pandemic, which is online. In all of that digital back and forthing, there is one place on the web that seems to be very stable. And even though it's incredibly dynamic, it's Wikipedia, which we're going to learn a lot more about in the next hour or so, and how it works, how it relies on the crowd more than anything I can think of. It relies on the crowd to maintain some sense of what's going on in the world, whether it's COVID-19 or climate and climate change or every issue you can imagine. There's a back end here that I think is underappreciated. I'm hoping to bring some exposure to it through what to the extent I can. I'm Andy Revkin. I'm at the Earth Institute of Columbia University, where I'm building an initiative on communication and sustainability. And my daily question is, can we make information matter and make connectivity matter? Both of those things, they're very different. And information isn't really actionable knowledge until it gets from one place to another, and often until there's a conversation around it. So I'd been thinking about this for a long time, but there was an article that really pulled me in Mashable by Mark Kaufman, who's one of my guests today. And it just came out a few days ago. And it basically dives you into the world of Wikipedia guardians. Today, you're going to meet some, as well as Alex Stinson, who is at Wikimedia Foundation, which is kind of the back end of this amazing operation as well. You'll meet my guests in a second. And I just wanted to say hi first to Mark. And how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Where in the world are you? I bet the Bay Area, right?
Well, I'm talking to you from the woods of northern Michigan, where I'm recently moved.
And is it outside the zone of deep concern for the virus?
I don't know if there's a zone that's outside.
Yeah.
I can say that I'm doing my best to avoid spreading disease, and it appears to me that there doesn't seem to be kind of a safe non-concerning place in the U.S. right now.
No, certainly not where I am. It's great to have you here. So what prompted you to do the article?
Well, I've always known that generally, just in my personal life, that Wikipedia is a pretty cool place to visit for. I'm a musician, so I like to, for example, go to like the Wikipedia music page, and I've always found it just kind of a way in to learn about new aspects of things and open up new avenues of historical topics in history. So I've always kind of known that it can be pretty reliable and a big asset, but I never used it professionally, and for whatever reason I stumbled upon the Wikipedia climate change page, also the global warming page, and it was earlier this year. I have no idea how I found my way there, but I did.
So it's not like you've been covering climate as a reporter or the like.
Oh, I mean, no, I cover climate change as a reporter.
Yeah,
for Mashable. But anyways, I found my way to the page, and I was there, and I was looking through it, and I thought, wow, this is really well done.
And you probably said, how could that be?
Yeah, that's right. So that's what happened. That's what happened. I said, who's doing this? There are hundreds of citations. They're good. like all the points you would want to make. It's like kind of journalistic in ways, especially the lead paragraphs. And so that's what happened. I said, "Who's doing this? This is pretty impressive."
And yeah, again, I think for the average person, that's kind of like amazing. Who's behind the scenes? I'm going to open up the Wikipedia page so folks can see it. Here's climate change, and just what you said about global warming having a separate page, or climate change, brings to mind a whole bunch of questions we could spend hours on related to definitions. I'm really a stickler for making sure everyone in a conversation or a debate about something uses a common sense of what you're talking about. And for global warming, I'll just briefly show this because it's useful to see. The two biggest organizations on the world dealing with global warming have different definitions. I mean, of climate change. Climate change, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the 30-year-old science board, is just climate change. It's climate change changing over time, period, for any reason. You know, climate has changed in the past, changed in the future. The Framework Convention on Climate Change, also a UN body, only constrains its definition of climate change to a change of climate that is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the atmosphere. This dates from like 1992. So that's why I think there's a big task here. It's really tough. And let's go around the world here, literally around the world. Lisa McNamara, you're at an interesting network you're based in South Africa, and the CDKN network, you could describe a little bit, is part of a bigger organization. And then we have Femke Nisa, who's a research fellow at the University of Exeter in England. Euphemio Uwandu, I think you're in Nigeria. I hope we have an audio connection. And then Alex Stinson, who's senior program strategist for Wikimedia Foundation, which, as I said, is kind of let's find out. It's the back end. I think to me, it's still unclear how that part of it works too. Like, how many people actually work for Wikipedia? How many people are, before there was, you're probably all virtual anyway, or mostly. How big is that professional part?
Yeah, so the Wikimedia movement is a very large, global, sprawling movement that we have about 90,000 editors every month contributing to Wikimedia projects actively. And then we have many, many more people making one small edit, another small edit here and there. Billions of page views every month. And the Wikimedia Foundation itself only employs about 400 people. And the Wikimedia movement employs maybe another 200. So we have affiliated organizations around the world who have staff. And then we also have people who work semi-professionally in allied organizations, or either professionally or semi-professionally within allied organizations to do this, to contribute to Wikimedia projects. A good example of this is the National Library of Wales, which has a full-time Wikipedian who is the national Wikipedian. And his job is to organize people to contribute to Welsh Wikipedia.
Wow.
But this, and most of our staff are like fundraising, lawyers, and engineers, software engineers who support the servers and the platform.
Right, that must take a huge amount of work. Have you had a pretty good rate of not breaking down?
We're surprisingly up all the time. So my role is more of a community organizing role, and I've never been in a situation where the platforms have failed me while trying to do some type of organizing. It's amazing. We have some really talented open source software engineers and server the folks who do the back end as well.
Amazing. So let's hear a little bit from Femke and from Lisa. And then I want to just be sure, Euphemia, can you hear me? Oh, I got her muted. Wait. Euphemia, you may be muted. Oh, there you are. Can you hear us?
Oh, I got her muted.
Yes, I can hear.
There we go.
You clearly.
Good. So you're in Nigeria?
Euphemia, you may be muted. Oh, there you are. Can
Wow,
you
there's a tough, long echo there.
hear us?
Yes, clearly.
Wow. Let's try to bring you in a bit. There's a really long, I have never had an echo that went quite that long. That was interesting. We'll try to get back to you. I'm so thankful that you're trying to get to be part of the conversation. Lisa McNamara, can you tell us about your organization and how that fits into keeping this thing running?
Hi, thank you. So I work for South North, and South North's an NGO based in Cape Town, South Africa. And South North manages a program called the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, CDKN. And so CDKN as a program has been going for about 10 years, and its general mandate is around enhancing or supporting decision makers around climate and development issues, but then also very specifically around supporting knowledge uptake into decision making and research uptake. So we have, we're very much focused on the knowledge.
Interesting. We'll try to.
And no problem. So we've had about a 2-year history of kind of getting to know Wikipedia. We also been working with Future Climate for Africa, which is also a program run by South North. Well, the knowledge component of it, that's really producing some of the best science on climate change in Africa.
Sorry, I have something up that's totally not your network. That's really hilarious.
Oh, no problem. I hope our page is up to date.
It has nothing to do with that. Hold on, get there.
So we thought, we've got so much research and climate change research that's being done in Africa and led by African researchers, and it's really imperative that we get this onto Wikipedia. And I think over time, there was a Wikimedia conference held in climate change, and we kind of went along and we thought, oh gosh, this is quite interesting. There's a whole world we haven't actually thought about. And slowly we kind of, learned a bit more, started looking at pages. And then we also realized that there's an enormous gap in terms of African contributors to Wikipedia. I mean, I don't know, Alex can confirm some of the stats, but it's something like 1% of edits come from the continent, which is startling since Africa isn't going to be so hard hit by climate change. So we really thought, okay, this is something, this is a serious gap. We've got to encourage African contributors and also contributors from the global South more generally. So that's the start of our journey, and we're still on it, and it's great to be. It's really exciting. The Wikipedia platform is incredibly powerful and very underutilized in the climate change community. It's great to be involved with it.
So Femke, you're in England, you have roots in continental Europe, and you're focused on climate, and you were featured in Mark's story as one of those who is very enthusiastic about this. One aspect of what I'm doing on these Monday broadcasts, which are called Thriving Online, is trying to help foster and spread skills that can help us all navigate information better. And what drew you from your scholarly work to helping to poke at and improve this knowledge base?
So I actually didn't come from the scholarly work. When I started editing, it was because of a different gap that exists on the Wikipedia, the gender gap. I read an article somewhere about that women scientists are quite often redelegated into a women scientist category where male scientists are the scientists. And that basically, I decided to do something against it and decided to write articles, biographies about women in science. And later on, when I began to study climate change in my master's, I applied all of that knowledge of Wikipedia and started editing in that region.
And what was your first experience like? Like, what was it like when the first week you said, I'm going to try this? You logged in, you signed up, got an ID, and how do you know even how quickly did you learn the rules of the road and all that?
Well, I started on a Dutch Wikipedia, and the lovely thing of starting there is that there aren't that many rules. The English Wikipedia is sometimes a bit intimidating to new users because they set up a whole set of rules how to make the content as accurate and neutral as possible. And these rules aren't that well described in a Dutch Wikipedia, so it was quite an easy start.
And what drew you to the climate side of things? And Mark, I'd love to get your description of some of the people that range of people you pulled into your article.
Well, I started on Dutch Wikipedia again here, and that article was written by a group. You could clearly see there were a lot of climate deniers that had contributed to that article, and I found it quite scandalous that Wikipedia, which is meant to be neutral, was so biased on that topic. So I completely rewrote that. And I switched to the English Wikipedia when I noticed that it was severely out of date. And because it has become more clear that climate change is affecting so many things on Earth, being severely out of date meant that it was also quite biased, because it quite often had statement like, it is expected that X will happen when that is already happening.
Right.
And a lot of communities are already affected by these effects.
So Mark, how did you find your Wikipedian array of volunteer?
Well, for everyone else besides Femke, who candidly, says who she is on her Wikipedia profile, I had to. I created a Wikipedia profile, and I went to the talk page on the climate change page, which is basically where all the discussion happens between the editors. And I just found the users, the Wikipedians. I don't know who they are. They just have usernames that were pretty active, and they were, having constructive, debates about what they were covering and what not to cover. And I just contacted them and was able to connect with, a total of 4 of the 7 currently core kind of editors to the page.
And so, Alex, your title again is a program strategist, but you're also, I think, you're involved with the sort of the community enabling and involved in that conversation, managing the human infrastructure a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm both a volunteer contributor and I do organizing professionally. And so this is a topic area that my passions overlap quite a bit. I like Femke, I'm really passionate about knowledge gaps. So I've been editing for about 10, 12 years, and these gaps that have big impacts on the world are really important for Wikipedia to cover well. Because people make decisions on this information. They evaluate it. So from my professional side, though, I look for topics and actions like the gender gap that Femke mentioned that are good for a public to be involved in our projects. And I'm trying to figure out how to support the communities who want to rally those people to fill those gaps. With the gender gap, we know that there's a lot of tactics that have worked for bringing in both more women editors and women organizers to the movement, to write women's biographies, to fill knowledge gaps about women in the arts, for example, through art and feminism. And so at the foundation, we've been given a kind of mandate through a strategy process for from our community to look at topics for impact. Like, how do we fill the knowledge gaps that really matter on Wikipedia, that have this public impact? And of course, right now, the Sustainable Development Goals are really important. So that's how I got involved in this space. Is I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we make this call to action better? Where do we look for organizers or organizations like South South North and CDKN to fill those gaps? To bring in experts or potential editors to fill those gaps. And there's a lot of people who want to do that right now. Like climate communications has a lot of people very interested in working on that.
I've just posted up on visually here on the screen a shortcut to the registration page for this upcoming wiki for climate editing, editathon. Boy, it's hard to say editathon, but there you go. And I'll show a slide in a little bit with more detail on that. I'll just put that up periodically. Alex, could you show us around a little bit? Like,
yeah. So I think there's like a couple different ways that we can kind of think about content on Wikipedia. So first, most people come to Wikipedia from search. And so you will find...
sorry. There we go.
So you often come to Wikipedia through search, and you'll be searching for these topics, and someone will click on Wikipedia, and they'll come to a page like this. And there's kind of two parts to the community organizing for finding the community. The first is on this talk page, that discussion page that Mark was talking about. We have these wiki projects. And as Mark was describing, where are the wiki projects? There's a group of editors who are active, and they've organized themselves on English Wikipedia to cover this topic, to create a kind of informal working group to fill the content gaps. And here we've organized and kind of the community, and again, I'm one of those volunteer editors as well as an organizer professionally. And in my volunteer time, I'm part of the community that helps curate these content. So you'll see that there's over 2,500 or nearly 2,500 articles that are in the scope of this project. And we've evaluated them by two kind of types of quality, like how good are the articles and how important are they? But we also have a bunch of different tools, so we can see like who's editing what articles recently, which articles are kind of actively working. And we have recommendations on how to get started. So for someone who's interested in editing about climate change topics, we have some easy actions you can do, like improving the lead section of a Wikipedia article or writing about climate change in your own geography. And this kind of activity is really important. So if you're not familiar with these kind of community policies that Femke was talking about, you might not know where to start. And so one of the actions I want to show you is improving accuracy or fact checking. So if you may not know, Wikipedia is really dependent on the citation. The citation is how we say we defer authority. So every editor on Wikipedia is anonymous. And by saying, we're not experts, but our citations are experts, that's how the English Wikipedia community has kind of improved the quality of their content over time. Is like the citations are where we get our authority and our information. And so we have some tools that help you find what's called a citation needed statement. So you might see these when you're browsing. And this basically means that like a reader or editor thought this might
sorry.
the reader or editor thought this was a doubtful statement. And so like fixing a citation needed is actually where a lot of people start. They might say, oh, I'm interested in finding one. And through this tool, I found one actually on carbon footprint that I think I could research. So I could say, oh, I think I've got this. And you'll find that like different sections of Wikipedia articles have these gaps. And this whole paragraph has no citation, which means there's something to fix.
Does the algorithm, is there an algorithm that keeps track and kind of highlights these gaps, or is it just people scouring things?
This is people scouring things. So Wikipedia has kind of two types of editors. There's the folks like Femke who do like a really deep edit, and she spends a lot of time on one page improving the quality. And then there's people that come along and they notice something small and they fix it, right? So it might be a typo, might be a missing citation. And this is a really good example of something you could fix. So if you click on edit, we have this great new visual editing interface. So if you tried editing Wikipedia many years ago, you might have seen a bunch of wiki markup, kind of a HTML type markup in the back end. But now we have this interface that looks like word processor. And you can actually just click on the citation needed and go, oh, I think I have a citation for that. And we can see that we can use something like the EPA or the IPCC for the biggest emissions to cite that. So I'm not going to save this edit, so I'm just going to pick a source that say, okay, so say I could find the statement here in the source I was looking for. We actually have this tool that goes out and scrapes the metadata for that source and actually allows you to insert it as a fully formatted citation in Wikipedia. So if I click insert and then I went up here to go publish and save, that would be an action that improves Wikipedia for climate knowledge. And this is the kind of actions that an editor takes every day when they go and to improve a Wikipedia page. Is like, where are the gaps? Where is there not a source? And how do I either add information or add high quality sources?
So interesting. Euphemia was in the green room, but now she's disappeared again. I'm hoping to get her on. Is there another way to find out when, like these issues, as you said earlier, Femke mentioned that in the Netherlands, the contestation around climate change had a bubble. You know, there was a moment when it was much more contested. And just when you were talking about the carbon footprint, right now there's kind of that's a contested term. So I don't know, because there's assertions that Shell and other companies essentially invented carbon footprinting, although I know you can go back further and understand that it predated them. But that would be something that would then immediately become, to me, potentially a sort of a war zone on Wikipedia. And how does that play out?
Well, I think Femke actually has some of the most experience doing this because she often is a moderator of these conversations in the climate space.
Yeah, so imagine that somebody wants to add something that is quite controversial. The way you do it, you can be bold, you can just edit immediately, and there might be some other editor who doesn't agree. So then you go into this cycle where somebody adds something, the next editor reverts it, and you go to the talk page to discuss. And then on the talk page, you hopefully attract more people so that you can get consensus about what is appropriate. And one of the rules we have to keep Wikipedia neutral is that everything has to be in proportion. So you cannot have like half a page of criticism when the reliable sources barely talk about criticism of a certain concept. You have to put it in proportion to how it appears in reliable sources. So you get a long discussion there, and quite often you get into some kind of compromise, or you get a better understanding if you read the sources a bit better. But sometimes you need somebody external to help you find that compromise and find good wording. And there are loads of different programs, resolution. Basically, there's a lot of tools to get to a conclusion if you can't find consensus with the people that are active already on that specific article.
Is there in that discussion room, the talk page, are there sort of intermediaries or arbiters who come in sometimes, or can you kind of
by default there aren't? By default, almost all discussions are basically sorted between the people that are active on a certain article. Only when you cannot sort it out between yourself will you ask for help. So you can ask for a third opinion if there's a discussion between two people, or you can make a request for comment where you basically get notification on all the different wiki projects that are relevant, and then hope to get a bigger group of people. And if it's not entirely clear what the outcome is, then some external person will close the discussion and determine what the outcome was.
That's interesting. And that's all, by the way, I assume those discussions are all typed back and forth.
They're all typed, yeah. You're not supposed to, even if you know people in person, for transparency, we want everything to be typed so that it's easily documented.
That's interesting. I'm going to try to bring Euphemia in again. Let's see if we can connect. Okay. This is one of the issues, connectedness, and gaps in that, not just gaps in the knowledge on the Wikipedia page, but who has more access to good bandwidth in the internet determines which societies can move forward better. Euphemia, can you hear me okay? Euphemia? Sorry. It's a real long lag. While we're trying to connect with her, maybe Lisa, can you describe a little bit the network in Africa, how that builds, whether it's someone in Nigeria like Euphemia or elsewhere? What are the particular challenges in filling the information gaps in countries that sometimes have limited capacity to be online even? Oh, did we all freeze? I think we all froze there for a minute. Speaking of the internet, Lisa, did you hear my question?
Yes. So I think, yeah, the digital divide is a severe constraint. But I do think that that is kind of something that might be lessening over time. I think especially during this COVID period, I think there's been lots of lessons learned around how to actually bring in communities and bring in those sort of less connected. I think that there's also a huge I know for in terms of Wikipedia engagement with African experts. I mean, we started a task force, which is like a subgroup of the climate change project, and there's been some reasonable engagement with that. But I think there's a lot of time demands on African researchers and who've managed, who've got lots of teaching burdens and lecturing burdens, and then they also have to, potentially do a little bit of consulting on the side, and then the time dwindles to actually actively engage with Wikipedia. But what we did find we had a webinar recently. There's so much enthusiasm actually from African scholars to engage, and for the Wiki for Climate webinar, we've got an enormous contingent from all across Africa ready to edit next week. So I think that the access is a problem, but that's I don't think that's going to be a determining factor for not being able to engage with Wikipedia and the global knowledge commons. We just have to find a way to make it work.
So it seems so. Oh, sorry. Alex, I was going to offer this observation that it seems so big and so functional right now, but obviously we're looking at significant gaps and that could be filled better. And from the inside, the evangelism part of what's needed next to spill that, to build more of a community around, to normalize the idea that this is a public asset. It's like mowing the lawn on the town green, or it's a true commons. So what needs to be done?
Well, there's this like complexity that Lisa described of that to edit Wikipedia right now, and in most contexts, it's voluntary, right? You're a volunteer, and so you have to have time, you have to have access to resources, you have to have not a ton of pressures on your energy, and so finding like where volunteerism is already happening in these communities is really important. So a lot of our communities, say in Ghana or Nigeria, are working really heavily with youth and students involved in kind of college programs or kind of volunteer programs or youth kind of professional development programs to be involved in these projects. But also partnerships with organizations like CDKN that like create space for the experts to come and be professionally validated for that work. Like, hey, this space is part of your professional responsibility and it matters. Is so important. And we've seen this in other topic areas too, medicine, in the gender gap work, in libraries. So the Wikimedia movement is very well received in libraries. It's the kind of overlap between what makes a good Wikipedian and what makes a good librarian is very close. It's a care about public knowledge, good citations, research skills, a willingness to kind of dig into any topic that matters. And I think like the next step, and this is where CDKN and South-South-North can be really powerful, is to say, no, this is our professional responsibility too. And those of you that have these skills, that have these passions, that do climate communication, that do SDG communication, you ought to be involved too, because this is kind of one of the frontiers. So it's about like finding the right audience and providing the right support.
Are there partners that I'm thinking about an organization called Climate Feedback, which essentially is a bunch of scientists who, I'll just show it here, who voluntarily serve as kind of a Snopes force looking at hot stories around climate change, whether they're overstating it or denying it. And it's a significant network. Do they know this is a capacity too, or does that get interlaceable in some way?
I do know there's at least one person in our community involved in that group as well. The whole open source kind of technology and software space is very integrated in that way. And so Daniel Meechan, actually. But it's kind of interesting that like the climate communication space hasn't shown up more on Wikipedia up to this point. Like I did statistics recently, and from like last October 21 to the most recent October 21, there were 98 million page views to those clear kind of climate change articles and that's just 1 year, and that's just the like 2,500 articles that are core, right? Right. And then we know climate change is about all of this other parts of human activity and like how we adapt, how we mitigate, how we change. And so there's all these other places that I think we're just like, no one has told the climate communication space, like, hey, you belong, right? And this is where the South-South-North kind of handbook that they recently produced is really valuable, because it's like, hey, you belong, and here's the way to do it.
Oh, that sounds, I'll try to find that. If you have the link, you could pop it in. I'll show that. But some of those stats are pretty remarkable. The New York Times is a very popular place, but it doesn't get 98 million views of its climate change articles. So this is important. This is important for public discourse going forward.
So
sorry,
I have not seen anyone compare our page views to any other source, and I would love for that to happen, because I suspect we're outpacing most of the other public platforms for this. But the quality of our content on some of these pages is not so good.
But you were saying the quality is not so good? Or
no.
Always a work in progress?
It's a work in progress. Wikipedia is a work in progress, and that's what kind of creates this space for organizing.
So, Mark, let's talk a little bit about journalism and this. When I was at the Times, there was a point, 2005 or so, when, as a climate reporter, we were paying attention to our God, what they call them, topics pages. The Times used to have a topics page. I don't know if Mashable does. So if you click on the word climate change in the story, it used to go to a page that was kind of our summary of our knowledge of the basic idea of climate change. And now when you click on that link, it just goes to a list of stories. There's no actual sense of what the Times says when it means climate change, which I think is problematic. If I was still in the newsroom there, I would say one of the important things that can lead to this kind of clearer discussion around these terms is if everyone defines their terms. What do you mean when you say climate change? Are you including, as you were just talking about, CO2 driven climate change, that kind of thing? So when you think about Mashable or your other journalistic experience, are we doing enough just telling stories?
I suppose the simple answer is no, but a good engaging story that messes with someone's expectations is the best thing I know of to get someone kind of, reading about a topic
like this one.
Yeah. So, I suppose when it comes to educating people about something like climate change right now, nothing is ever going to be enough. But I think these type of stories are critical, and there aren't enough of them. How about that?
Yeah. Euphemia is coming back on in a second, I hope. So let's talk about the editathons, which are, there's one coming up. I'll show that in a second. I just want to, whoops, let me go back here. Euphemia, let's try one more time. You're so patient, and it's really great to have you in the discussion if we can. Can you hear me? It's a
Yes,
long...
I can now. Thank you so much.
I'm going to give you a question to answer and then just step back and let you answer it, because I think there's a really long lag. How did you come to be involved with editing Wikipedia? And tell us a little bit about your background and how that relates.
Okay. Well, it started first during my postgraduate studies, and prior to that, we usually use Wikipedia when doing assignments, and then nobody complained. But then when I got to postgraduate studies, everything changed, and then complaining that some of those based on the fact that these articles were not written by professionals in that. I actually studied environmental management. So that this is something that any other person can. That was when I reached out to Olaineo Shola, that's the chairman of Wikipedia Nigeria user group. And then I told him about this and declared my interest to help change
We tried. One thing we could do if we do another session on this, and I think we can do one down the line, is to have her record a bit of an explanation of her role, and I'll talk to her about that. I've done that on my music webcasts. By the way, Mark, on Sunday mornings, this show is all about music and songs and poetry and stuff. So depending if you're a performer, you can come on. And on that one, there's a young performer in Zambia, in Lusaka, who's been on many times, but quite often I'll have to put on a video that he's pre-recorded because the bandwidth is just not good enough. So I'd like to get back to the main issue here, which is how folks can get involved. So a clear one, obviously, is with this upcoming session, which starts, it's hard to believe that November 24th. Is that really next week? Is it really? Oh my God, it's very soon.
Hard to believe for me too.
It's about, 8 days from now. My God.
Yeah, lots to do.
Maybe Lisa and Alex, you can just talk about these sessions. What can people expect to learn? How does this work? Especially for the new, is this about recruiting new people right on that day, or is there preparation they should do before then?
I think the only preparation they need to do is really just to sign up. So I think this is a bit linked to what Alex was saying earlier, that we're really trying. We first did a webinar a couple of weeks ago. We're really trying to cast the net as widely as possible in the climate change community and see who's interested, and to try and galvanize some enthusiasm. So there's no need to do much preparation. We're doing the editathon over a week, so that if you need to fit this in with other things, you can even edit on the weekend if you can't make it during the week, because it does cover a weekend, so that you could even. And we're also saying you don't need to attend the whole week at all. You can just come to the opening webinar. We're having an opening Zoom session just to give you some of the basics. And you can come to that opening Zoom session. We're going to have daily check-ins where you can just interact with other editors and some experienced Wikipedians, answer questions. We're also going to have a virtual workroom on Slack where you can also ask questions and also interact and network with other editors. So you can participate in any or none of those activities. And you can edit a paragraph, you can edit a lead, you can add a source. It's really up to what you're able to do, but just to get some indication of what it's like to work with Wikipedia, meet other Wikipedians. And then we're having a closing webinar. We are offering some prizes for good edits and certificates, so there is an incentive. And then we'll have a closing webinar. I will also be giving you a bit of information about how to interact with the Wikipedia community. And yeah, so the aim is really just to get the climate change community switched on to Wikipedia and to understand that they can, in fact, edit Wikipedia and they can contribute to this public good, essentially. And we all have a collective responsibility to do that, I think, as climate change specialists. Yeah, this is ours. It belongs to us, and we need to make sure that it's representative of the experience of climate change around the world, really. So, yeah, that's my sales pitch.
Yeah, what you said. This is ours. I think that there's so many aspects of life now that people don't appreciate. They're basically a commons. And that requires attention and involvement. Wikipedia wisely posts those donate buttons once in a while. I have clicked on them, and again, we all use these things and don't think about them, but also the direct interactivity, whatever your issue is, whatever your expertise is, or your interest in fostering a common baseline of, again, knowledge and access. And by the way, the connections you make, I guess if they remain anonymous, that limits that sense of the full community dynamic that can be possible, but it must build a community. Do you know who the others are, even though they're anonymous? Or have you obviously here, Femke, you've come out into the public arena.
Yeah. I've met a few editors in person. Usually when you work together really intensively, then you do develop a friendship of some kind, and then it's nice to meet people in person. There are Zoom meetings for the UK community where we speak to each other and sort of discuss the broader lines of what we'd like to see happen on Wikipedia. So there's definitely a community aspect to it, but most people I only know by their Wikipedia name.
Great. I'm going to open up another page here in a second. Mark, are you intrigued enough that you have poked at it yourself? Have you become a Wikipedian? That crosses the line, obviously, but not necessarily. You're.
No, I don't think it crosses any line. Journalists can be people too. I haven't dipped my foot into it just because I just learned all about it. Like doing this story introduced me to how Wikipedia works. Talking to Femke and the other editors about how it's done, and I do think it's really cool. I just time-wise, the commitment that they put into it is really impressive, and I understand that I wouldn't have to be as dedicated as they are, but I haven't figured out if it's going to be something that I'm going to get involved in or not yet.
Interesting. Well, I would think I'll ask Alex this in the context of edits. I'm thinking openly here. So suppose I'm still at the New York Times. I'm a good climate reporter. I've been working on this for 30 years. I see something wrong, and I've done a story that's relevant. is it self-serving to, would that be a link you wouldn't put in because it's pointing to your own content?
I think there's different kinds of kind of self conflict of interest. So you shouldn't be promoting like your own institution or your own person in the process of improving Wikipedia articles. But if something you're reporting is general knowledge or is being reported broadly, there's no reason why you wouldn't cite something that maybe your institution or your group of researchers published alongside the other sources that are talking about it. And this is something that, you know, as you kind of learn more, experts may not always be the best people to write about their expertise, but sometimes they're the best people to write about the like one step removed expertise, like the thing that like they have to know about in order to do their research. So how I got into the climate space is I'm really passionate about local food as a thing. And I find, just because of my natural curiosity and my desire to learn about that space, like I know a ton of things about food waste, for example. And when I see an article about food waste or about climate communication or the agricultural impacts that cause climate change, the agricultural systems both causing and affected by climate change, I find that I just know a few more things than the Wikipedia article has, and that is the thing we need. The problem with Wikipedia is that a lot of people read it and see it as complete. But what experts and people who know something like a journalist about a domain of knowledge often find is that there's like these malicious gaps. There are these gaps that are just so sad because no one was looking for it. And I think part of the reason a lot of people don't notice these gaps on Wikipedia is they come to Wikipedia through Google. So if it's not at the top of their Google search, they're not going to see it. And so I think projects like the editathon or like any outreach we do, like the gender gap work that Femke first got introduced to the movement, it's about looking for the gaps and helping people read Wikipedia critically with like, what can be improved? How can we improve it? And that's what, so myself and there's a editor who's on the chat on YouTube, Phoebe Ayers, who's a librarian at MIT. We've been working on this page, the small to medium tasks page on Wiki Project Climate Change, because what we realized is people don't know where to look for gaps. And so some of the things you have to do is like make it really easy for people to see them. What gaps are there? Why are they there? What kind of source could you add? And with the gender gap, we've been very good at doing this because it's easy to say these women biographies are missing. There's like an easy statistic to measure. But I think with climate change, it's much harder because it's like every part of human society. There's a perspective missing about this.
That's sure.
One of the things that makes it difficult to find these gaps is that there is loads of outdated information on Wikipedia as well. So one of the things I try to do is basically delete large parts of articles that have information that is completely irrelevant to current day society. Because that is, when you see an article that's really short, you know that's something missing. When it's really long, you might not immediately think, oh, I want to add something to that. And that is a problem that will probably get worse over time as more and more articles are written and are quite long already.
Is there the magic of the human element here is really important. At the same time, I'm wondering if there can be a role for either internal or external AI in helping identify gaps or a way to flag them. I mean, you have them here. You have, I love this, small to medium tasks. That's such a great invitation for someone who has a small amount of time and some expertise to come in. But I didn't know if there's some, like if you could have a sign-up tool. So let's say Columbia University's graduate students could like then be alerted when there's a GMO entry that's been identified as really old or something like that. Is that already happening, or does that make sense at all, or is it
yes
not productive?
It makes so much sense. So this is actually my job. So the core part of my job is matching human enthusiasm with the tools that allow us to organize people with that enthusiasm to get onto the platform. And this big gap of like, where are the problems? How do we find them is really hard. So that citation needed statement thing is actually something we can train AI to look for. To look for sentences that ought to have a citation. And we actually, our research team worked with a group of researchers to produce a machine learning model to do just that. But the next step, and we actually are, one of our product teams has a grant out for this, is interpreting like what topics are in a article and what topics do similar articles cover. The kind of epitome example I have for this, and I'll show you, share my screen again, is every geography article ought to have a section on climate change. Or every major city in the world right now is building a climate resilience strategy of some sort. And so I'm going to show you one that I helped a human identify and then work on, and then I can describe like what the theoretical AI version of this might be. So in the article for Boulder, Colorado, we had an editathon a few months back, and we were trying to figure out like, okay, what task can we give people who know very little about the science of climate change, right? And every geography article about a big city should have a climate change section because it's the responsibility of that government to build a resilience and response mechanism, right? They should be talking about that in some way. And so this one editor that I worked with, she went in and read, oh, search climate change, Boulder, Colorado. And that overlap gave her 4 or 5 results, including the plan from the city and the county, and EPA research, and some other planning guides from like local agencies. And she was able to compile this paragraph in about 45 minutes. If you have half an hour, 45 minutes, you can add a climate change section. Now, the question is, how do we teach a piece of software to notice that these gaps are there so that humans don't have to read the article and find the gap? They can just intuit. And so what we would have to do is assign for each paragraph, like what are key topics for that? And then what kind of thematic topic area do they apply to? So these 3 paragraphs have words like climate mobilization, climate change, there's probably mitigation somewhere in here, climate emergency. If these concepts are showing up in the section, then we should be able to train, find 5, 10, 15, 100 of these sections and show an AI like, hey, like every geography article that is so we have a metadata structure sitting behind Wikipedia articles, and we can tell you this article is about a city, but what we can't tell you is what content is in the sections. And so that next step is the thing that we need to work on.
And by the way, so much of what you're saying is an issue in scholarship and actual research still. I know geographers who do work that's incredibly important to determining climate vulnerability, let's say in a wildfire zone, who haven't really been part of the conversation around climate change. And they do great mapping. So, but they're just not integrated into that. Even other issues, volcano preparedness. I did a session a few years ago at an understanding risk meeting in Mexico. And I brought in via Twitter, Stephen Strader, he's a geographer who does incredibly important vulnerability mapping. And he just said, yeah, I don't really interface with this field of disaster risk reduction. I'm like, wait, how could that possibly be? So building that culture feels like an important opportunity too. Then that could spill into this as well. That's really, really, I'm glad you're doing that. I'm glad that capacity is in there. Sorry.
Oh, and I was going to say, it's important for all the sustainable development goals and all these major human issues, right? So it doesn't just stop at climate, and it doesn't just stop at these geography articles. It's like every kind of knowledge has these knowledge gaps, and they have them at different levels. So like a topic like Boulder, Colorado might be, well, explored, but something in Nigeria may not.
Right.
And so we need both, like we need all kinds of different eyes looking for gaps on Wikipedia.
Right. And maybe does this get at the is there still a is academia making a mistake by discouraging students from thinking about Wikipedia when they source? Because if you had more eyeballs there through classwork, then they could be opportunity eyeballs also. Unless I'm missing an evolution, I still get the sense that at least in high school or middle school, students are like, no Wikipedia sources.
Yeah.
Is it my experience is that lots of teachers say Wikipedia itself isn't a reliable source, but it might be a good starting point to look for actual reliable sources. And I think that is the proper way to work with Wikipedia, because you never know what kind of editors have been behind it, how much it has been vetted, how much it has been kept up to date, whereas the sources that are cited are typically quite high quality.
Yeah, I'm just adding a comment because there was a question that came in about climate feedback. And here's their, pretty sure it's, did I spell it right? Yeah, that's the shortcut. Sorry.
I also wanted to talk about a group of, so we have if you're in North America, we have a partner organization called the Wiki Education Foundation that helps college professors assign their students to write these Wikipedia articles and fill the gaps. And a lot of the articles that we find in the climate space are first started by these students. So I found an article, just today or yesterday, that I was like, oh, this is surprisingly well written. Oh, that was written by college students who were basically doing a literature review for their term assignment, right? And this is, I think, Femke, you started in a college setting, and I started a college setting for that reason, right? Like, you have research skills, you have access to a library, you're curious and learning a topic, so you have empathy for the new person who's reading.
That's interesting. Yeah, well, I think that could be harnessed. Perhaps there's a way to normalize that. As Femke was just saying, that those students who go to Wikipedia as an initial source, if they identify something that seems weak, that then is information that could lead to one of those little buttons to pop up saying, hey, someone could fix this. It feels like there's great opportunity here to go forward. I posted the wrong link for climate feedback. Oops, let me do it here. And we're about ready to close this session, but I hope we can come back and do another one, maybe after the editathon. I like to keep these iterative because you just learned everything in our existence right now is a learning process. So that's climatefeedback.org right there. It's the full words. And I did want to show last couple of things and then any final thoughts. And the last screen I'll show is the one for the editathon. Here is what I think could be, I have to put, here we go. I think I have to put Alex in touch with Steven Strader and Walker Ashley, because they have this, just search for the hashtag expanding bullseye. They have a method for pulling in data around a risk zone that's a really powerful illuminator of when the risk isn't a change in the climate, it's a change in the community. This was, I actually helped get Steve a New York Times op-ed when he did this, when Florence was going to hit the Carolinas. This was 1940, housing density. 1990, housing density. 2018, housing density. So we're building risk. And that data, the data are all there. It's a matter of integrating them with how we think about climate vulnerability, climate risk. And then that adds some richness to this thing we call the climate crisis, which sometimes feels paralytic because, you know, cutting greenhouse gases is a long journey, but there's all this stuff you can do on the ground in the meantime. So thank you all for being here. I'm really sorry. I'll get in touch with Euphemia from Nigeria to see if we can do something with her in the future. I hope you can come back sometime. Here's the Wikipedia climate change page. Here's climate feedback, as I said earlier. And again, this all gets archived. Check out the great Mashable article by Mark Kaufman. And Mark, I'm serious about getting you on our Sunday show. And here's the Wiki for Climate project that's happening November 24th through December 1st. And there's lots of ways to sign up. I flashed the portal here earlier. Go to Twitter at Revkin. You'll see a lot of what we've been discussing the last hour or so. Any last words? Femke, let's start with you as the hardworking backside volunteer community around Climate Wiki. Who would you love at your side?
That one of the things that researchers, when they think about their time commitments, should realize is how much you learn from editing Wikipedia. So whenever you go into a new field or a new topic within your field, you have to do a literature research. And combining that with Wikipedia basically means that you don't lose any time because you have to do that work anyway, and you consolidate it by writing articles. So it's a win-win situation there.
Well, I'll try to spread that culture as much as I can. And Mark, do you think you'll be doing more on this strange universe?
Yeah, I'm pretty pleased to have entered the universe, and I'm very keen on delving into more about the culture, which I've just started to learn about, and it's fascinating.
And sorry, Lisa, again, last word on the session coming in 8 days or so. I think we've posted some ways for people to get in touch. It's CDKN, at CDKN. Is that the tag on Twitter?
Yeah, CDKN Network.
Network, right.
And our web address is www.cdkn.org.
Okay.
And CDKN Network on Twitter.
And certainly just Googling for
so please,
Wiki for Climate, that hashtag too. It would be it's a good way.
Yeah. Google Wiki for Climate and you'll find us. We've got an email address, wiki@south-south-north.org, that you can also get in touch with us. So there's lots of ways. If you're on social media, if you're on the web, you'll find us. And come and join us in the
great.
Slack workroom.
This is an arena where
the
enforced isolation we all live in is kind of, you live in a community that's around the world, that's dynamic and connected, and you're doing really important work to nurture a public commons that's one of the most important features of the online information landscape. Thank you all for being here today. And those who were watching, you can share this when we're done. Sustain What? This webcast. This is the Thriving Online Monday session of Sustain What? It's a global online conversation identifying solutions to the complicated, shape-shifting, and epic challenges of humanity's great acceleration. That was basically the last 60 years or so. We've been in Zoom mode, and the virus has imposed a great kind of pause on us. We're working our way through that. A prime focus is making sense of, getting the most out of the fast-forward information environment. That's the one element of the Earth system changing faster than the actual environment outside. This webcast is produced as part of my work building Columbia University's new Earth Institute initiative on communication and sustainability. As soon as we're done, as I said, share the link you've been watching on with friends in circles far and wide and get in touch with ideas. See that distracting scrolling bar at the bottom to do that. And thank you for being here, especially my guests, especially those in Europe and in Africa who where it's supper time, at least. Thank you again.